Hi everyone, this is Anne. We're making today's full episode totally free for everyone. You'll get the bonus segment, the Ask Anne Anything, and a very fun set of show notes that should send you down a real rabbit hole or memory lane, depending on when you were born. If you want to join the ranks of paid subscribers so you always get the full episode, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. Okay, on with the show. Okay, I'm sending the chat, and I've watched this many times, so I'm mostly just eager to watch your reaction. So whenever you are ready.
I'm watching the film.
Film is a great way to put it. And if you can describe it for us as you're watching it, that would be amazing.
Okay, it's like a crude animation of a bathroom, a men's bathroom, because they're urinals, and inside the urinals are a man's face singing a song, popping out of the urinal, singing together. Now we're on the street. There's a giant toilet.
There's so many toilets.
Sort of looming over the city, right, flanked by smaller toilets, all with the man's head inside of it. Oh my God, it's getting progressively stranger. The faces are sort of melting. The toilet is getting bigger. Every time the big toilet comes in, there's this song, Skibidi, Skibidi.
Can you tell us what song this is that's in the background?
I don't know. I don't know the song. Skibidi Bop, yes, yes.
Hold on. Let me...
Should I be familiar with that?
It's a Nelly Furtado song.
Oh, yeah. Wait, it is. Oh, that's wild. I haven't heard that in a long time.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
And I'm musicologist Nate Sloan, co-host of the podcast Switched on Pop.
This is a YouTube collection of 67 Skibidi toilet clips. This was sent to me by several parents who told me when I was trying to figure out, okay, what songs are you hearing from the early 2000s that are resurging? And they're like, my kids listen to this all the time because of the Skibidi toilet video.
A sentence you never thought you would utter.
I know. And so if you're a parent or if you have a fifth grade boy in your life, they have absolutely seen Skibidi Toilet. This is how this particular song, this particular Timberland song featuring Nelly Furtado has entered the cultural vernacular again. It's through something that you and I hadn't seen this video until a parent sent it to me. Had you ever seen Skibidi Toilet before?
No, I've never seen Skibidi Toilet.
But so what we're going to do...
I will never be the same.
This is our very weird way of trying to figure out all of the different ways, because I think there's not just one explanation, all of the different explanations for why there is music from the 2000s in particular that is resurging right now. So you were the person that came immediately to mind when I decided I wanted to do this show. And part of the reason I wanted to do this show was because I watched a whole lot of Rush Talk videos for my reporting on Rush Talk. And the Rush Talk, the dances that all of these 17 through 21-year-olds were doing, so many of them were songs from my college and post-college years. And I am a huge fan of your show. And I was like... the only person who can be really smart about this and not just say oh, music comes back again would be you. So can you describe for me what the sound of the 2000s is broadly? This is such a big question, but if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right, because pop music is always so diverse, but there are certain trends in the early 2000s you can detect. And a lot of them have to do with changing technology. Music is becoming more digital. It's becoming more synthesized, more processed, more manipulated. And some of these ways can be very apparent. It's right in 1999, so just on the cusp of the millennium, that we get a song like Cher's Believe, which is attributed to be the first use of conspicuous autotune on a track. And as we move into the 2000s, we hear that effect more and more. We hear voices that are chopped and processed and sped up and slowed down. We have whole songs that have been created inside a computer. Inside the box is the parlance of the music producer. So everything from the drums up to the guitars have been, completely digitally synthesized. And that becomes, I think, a hallmark of that sound, especially because it contrasts to the more rock oriented organic sound of the 1990s, when artists like Nirvana and Alanis Morissette were really highlighting these classic instrumental combos of drums, bass, and guitar, and very powerful naked vocals. So that's part of the sound, is this more kind of digital texture. And then I think there's also a move towards more kind of anodyne, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but more universal, sort of simplistic lyrics in pop songs. If music in the 1990s, like some of those artists we were just talking about, dealt with social ennui and female empowerment and engaged to some degree with issues that were happening in the world, music in the 2000s kind of turned inward and was really about, let's dance, let's love, let's have a good time. It was a little less engaged with the wider world, I would say. So if I had to boil it down to two things, musically, I would say more digital. Lyrically, I would say a little bit more hermetic and sort of hedonistic, maybe.
One song that is resurgent right now comes to mind, which is 50 Cent's Candy Shop, which does not have a ton of message other than like, hey, this is the candy shop, which has, connotations, but not necessarily like a deeper message. How much of the sound too is the sound of Timbaland, like as a producer?
It's absolutely the sound of Timbaland. It's the sound of the Neptunes, the duo made up of Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo. It's the sound of other R&B hip hop producers like The Dream, who worked with, and Tricky Stewart, who worked with Destiny's Child in the early 2000s. And of course, what these all have in common is this is a resurgence of Black musical style, of hip hop, of R&B, really starting to surge onto the charts, which is nothing new, obviously, in the history of popular music. But it is kind of the beginning of a takeover that will unfurl over the next decade and a half, in which hip hop really becomes the most dominant commercial genre in the pop music landscape. So we do see the seeds of that being sown in the early 2000s as well.
Yeah. When you think of like quintessential 2000s songs, we've talked about some of the style, but what are songs that come to mind for you?
Okay, for me, the first song I think of is Hey Ya by Outkast. This is a song that came out in 2003. It was the first song to go platinum, I believe, on the iTunes platform, which was brand new. Right. So to me, it sort of represents this technological shift in terms of music consumption that's happening. It is a song that, well, it's funny because it does meet that criteria I was talking about earlier. On the surface, it seems very happy-go-lucky. And today, I think it's a very common song to hear at like weddings and parties. But actually, underneath the surface, there's a little darkness to this song.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears, which came out right at 2000, a Y2K classic. I love this song because I feel like not only is it so definitive of its time, but it's Britney Spears has had a reappraisal in the last 5 years, and so much of the sort of criticism and dismissal that she met when she arrived on the scene has now changed to a certain level of respect and understanding of just how musically gifted and innovative she was.
The other ones that I think of, there's two, and both of these are also resurgent too, is Michelle Branch's, I don't even know the name of the song. It's just make them like, that one.
That's
right?
Vanessa Carlton, I
That's
believe.
Vanessa Carlton. No, what's Michelle?
1,000 miles. They,
Yes.
I also got them confused at that time. So you're not alone, and
And then the other one is Eminem, just generally Eminem,
just
like
generally
early
Eminem.
Eminem.
Yeah, yeah. My name is
Yeah.
the real Slim Shady. Yeah, another artist who was so controversial
Oh
when
my
he
gosh.
came out, and
Yes.
now is almost
Like a
like an
dad.
elder statesman. Yeah, exactly. What a transformation.
I can't believe that I didn't get that was Vanessa Carlton. I have Melody's in the chat of this podcast being like, "How dare you?"
I don't think you're the
Uh,
first to make that mistake. In your defense.
so part of this like resurgence is something that I am personally feeling and like want to talk about, right? And so
Mm,
that's kind of why I have a podcast. It's like, oh, I noticed something and I want to talk about it.
yeah,
But then there is also some evidence that this is happening from people who are parents who see it happening with their kids and
yeah,
people that like teachers have told me that this is what like kids are requesting in the music in their classroom, right?
yeah.
But then there is a playlist. Melody found this yesterday. It's called the All Out 2000s playlist. It's on Spotify and it's the eighth most popular on the app. 10 million followers.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I don't need to listen to it to know exactly what's going to be on it. And
Right.
it's also familiar to me that even when I hear this, like I hear it on the radio and I think of it as like, oh, that top 40 station is playing something kind of older without thinking like, oh, they're actually playing something that's like 20 years old, which is
Yes.
interesting in and of
Yeah.
itself, right? Like
Yeah.
playing early Rihanna, interesting for a top radio station to do.
Yeah.
And I also want to situate this in terms of like, I know that younger audiences always rediscover the music of their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation. Like, this would be akin to me listening to Melody suggested, like Donna Summers and the Bee
Uh-huh.
Gees. And I
Yeah.
didn't listen to Donna Summers or the Bee Gees, but I did listen to a ton of Simon and Garfunkel, which my parents thought was pretty weird that I was doing. Specifically, I listened to the concert in Central Park, which is like not even the best, Simon and Garfunkel. Like everyone's voice cracks like 17 times, but it's a great way to like really be immersed in Simon and Garfunkel. And then I
Yeah.
listened to like a lot of Joni Mitchell and that sort of thing. Did you listen to stuff that was older when you were a teen?
I did. I was always felt a little apart from my peers in that I gravitated less towards what was being played on Z100 and more like you're describing to the records that I found in my parents' collection. So
Yeah.
I was really into jazz, Sonny Rollins and Dizzy Gillespie, and I was into classic rock like Cream and Jimi Hendrix.
Yep. Yep.
And
Totally.
and even some more embarrassing things like Frank Zappa, which made me feel very very isolated. But
I feel like a lot of teens get really into Frank Zappa
I think it is a rite of passage.
or Peter Frampton. That's like my partner got really into Peter Frampton.
That's funny. I didn't have my own Frampton journey, but I definitely know others who have. Yeah.
Well, it's a way to distinguish yourself too, that isn't necessarily like delving deep into like indie or avant-garde stuff. You're like, I'm cool because I listen to like Sam Cooke or something, right? Which isn't
Yeah.
like this is popular music, but seems unpopular or interesting when all of your peers are listening to Z100, as you said.
I think so. I think there was perhaps more of a sort of binary too between mainstream and not mainstream that is more sort of opaque today. It's a little bit more inchoate, like what is mainstream and what is not, and what are you supposed to be listening to versus what is your own taste. And
Yep.
but all to say I was not listening to pop radio when I was growing up.
Did you like any pop music?
I did. I mean, so I was more of a 90s kid. That was my
Yeah.
decade. And I liked the weird songs that would come on and make it to the top of the charts. Do you remember a song called How Bizarre by OMC?
Yes, obviously.
That was my jam. I loved that track. I was really into Seal, Kiss from a Rose. That was
Well, I know this because of the This is something that you've talked about a lot, which is a beautiful song.
Yes,
right?
I got to interview Seal earlier
Yes.
this year. It was such a full circle moment for me, and he was so smart and gracious and surprisingly willing to talk at length about a song that he's probably really sick of talking about. But yeah, that was one of my favorites from my childhood. That was on the radio.
From the Batman soundtrack, like amazing.
Yes.
Soundtrack, this is something we could talk about forever, like the way that music popped up on soundtracks and how we discovered it that way. In fact, one of the songs that I loved that my parents were like, what is wrong with you, is there was a reggae band that covered Baby I Love Your Way for the Reality Bites soundtrack.
I think I know. I don't know the band, but I know exactly the version you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, you can still hear it on like, Bob FM or something.
Yeah.
But that's like, there was that resurgence vis-a-vis like random covers in that way. Okay. Listener questions for this episode. We're doing this a little bit different because basically listeners have written in with different theories, their own theories about why we're hearing music from the 2000s right now. So we're going to listen to them, talk about the theory, and then we'll come up hopefully at the end with maybe like an overarching theory. Does that sound good?
Excellent. I think it's a great plan.
All right, so our first question/theory comes from Lauren.
So I teach art classes after school and at summer camps to kids ranging from age 6 to 13 or so. And sometimes I let them choose the music that we listen to while we're working. And I'm utterly perplexed. Why are these kids listening to the same White Stripes, Coldplay, Linkin Park, or Eminem songs that were in heavy rotation when I was in college? At first, I assumed it was their parents doing, that they were just listening to the same music that their parents liked. But a lot of these kids tell me that their parents don't share their tastes in early aughts music. So is it millennials at work programming Apple Music and Spotify? What gives?
So first of all, I just love the idea of like a parent who's really into Linkin Park and like passing the love of Linkin Park down to their kids. I'm just positive that is happening somewhere. But
certainly.
If the kids aren't getting their music from their parents, where do you think they're getting it?
Yeah, this is such a riddle. I'm so glad Lauren wrote in because I have kids, but my kids are like 3 and 6 months old, so they don't have their own music tastes right now. And I was pretty shook when I heard Lauren's reporting from the field because this is kind of mysterious to me. My first theorem is that I wonder if each of these specific songs has found a foothold in the consciousness of a preteen somehow. Right. I'm not totally ready to ascribe this to a sort of generational music and an interest in music from a certain period in time. I would be curious to trace some of those specific songs.
Yeah.
For instance, the White Stripes, if we're talking about Seven Nation Army, that is a song that you would hear if you ever go to a sports game. It'll be chanted by the fans. It'll be something you hear when you're, I don't know, maybe out like at a skate rink or something, or I'm not, whatever kids do these days. That is a song that is sort of canonic at this point.
Yeah.
I think Coldplay might occupy a similar role. Some of these Coldplay songs are like the equivalent of, I don't know, what the Beatles were in the 60s. They're just like part of the musical ether.
Like clocks or something like that.
Exactly.
Like they're not listening to Yellow.
Right. Unless
Maybe
they're
are.
very emotionally deep 6-year-old maybe. Now Linkin Park, that's vexing. What is the story there?
Well, this is where I think something like SKIBIDI Toilet comes in handy, because I think that the same way that I discovered songs through soundtracks to movies, their discovery apparatus is probably through reuse in video games, in YouTube memes like SKIBIDI Toilet, right?
Yes.
Like that are created by people our age.
So the use of those might reflect the tastes of the creators, and then those get filtered down into the younger consumers. I find that compelling, and I in the course of doing our podcast, sometimes we will pose a similar question, like, why is this song having a resurgence right now. The way that pop culture circulates through time and space is endlessly surprising and fascinating. And we'll talk about a song sometimes and say, why is this popular? And people write in and they'll say, oh, my kids know that song because it was featured in Kids Bop.
Yep.
Or we're rewatching The Office with our kids, and at one point they make a reference to Lou Bega's Mambo Number 5, and now that's all they want to listen to. And so I think you're right that, you know, these songs, for millennial creators, these songs occupy some kind of foundational knowledge, and then they use those songs in their own videos and content, and then that gets filtered down to a younger generation of listeners. That seems pretty compelling to me.
I also think we can't discount how many of these songs are like used in the various jukebox style cartoons, animated features, right? So like,
yeah,
one of my friend's kids knows like all of these Queen songs, like just a lot of stuff, and it's all from it's like some cartoon that has like lots of animals in it that are performing.
Yeah.
Someone's going to write in and be like, I've watched that movie 1,700 times. I know exactly what you're talking about. But sing, Melody says it's sing.
Sing. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think
Sing.
like, even if you really absorbed that when you were 5 or 6, it sticks with you, right? Like the songs I know from when I'm 5 or 6 was like all of the Little Mermaid soundtrack or all of the Aladdin soundtrack. And now, instead of like these ballads written by Elton John specifically for The Lion King, it's their version of oldies redone and repackaged for them, and they can listen to them whenever they want to. Trolls. Yes, Trolls.
Yeah,
is also
Trolls,
responsible for
Minions, perhaps, Despicable Me. No, you're right. Movie soundtracks are such a powerful vector. And, you know, historically, that's nothing new. I mean, the first ever rock and roll hit, Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock in 1955, which changed the face of music forever, really became popular because it was featured in a film. And that was what, essentially, I think it's fair to say we wouldn't have had the rock revolution without the movie soundtrack that sparked that. So this is like a tried and true way to sustain popular culture interest, is to feature it in a film.
Yeah. Okay, our next question. This is like such a music nerdery question. It's perfect for us. So next question theory comes from Chris, who's citing a Chuck Klosterman theory, of course.
Right.
Isn't the early 2000s thing just like Chuck Klosterman's theory on listening to old bands like the Eagles? Like, I don't like New Found Glory, but New Found Glory sounds like a time when everything was fresh and exciting and weird in my life, and they were adjacent to the bands that I did like.
So basically this theory is that we are nostalgic for like, I mean, personally, I am not nostalgic for the early 2000s, but kids who weren't alive in the early 2000s are nostalgic for that time. And this fits with the theory that I have heard from Gen Zers about why they like this particular type of music, which is that you can't dance to contemporary music very well, right? They're not fun to like do a dance to.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of that music from the 2000s is like really fun to dance to.
Well, I think I take some issue with that because I do look around and find a lot of highly danceable music, including Dua Lipa's hit like Levitating or Don't Start Now, or, you know, I don't know, looking back over the last decade, Pharrell Williams, Happy, Bruno Mars, Mark Ronson's Uptown Funk. But perhaps in the aggregate there are less dance forward songs of recent vintage. I find Chris's theory compelling. Yeah, that Chuck Klosterman writing about the Eagles and discovering that the hatred that he felt for that band has mellowed over time, and in his middle age, I guess, sort of stepping back and realize and finding himself thinking, "Wow, I don't feel anything about this. Where did all that ire go? I don't feel it anymore." And I think I can relate to that sentiment. in terms of the nostalgia of that period, it's interesting, right? On one hand, I could see having nostalgia like for the 80s or the 90s. Those seem like very,
Yeah.
relatively sort of placid decades.
Yeah.
The 2000s began with 9/11 and then moved into an endless war and quickly followed by Hurricane Katrina. And I mean, I don't remember it as a particularly rosy time period.
Right.
But perhaps people who didn't live through it can look back and think, well, compared to what we're dealing with now, that was so lovely. What did we had to worry about Y2K and, like
like our internet speed, like
yeah.
your dial up.
I do imagine it seems very innocent in a way,
Yeah.
in comparison. Social media didn't exist at that point, and that must seem very Edenic in a way or something.
Even the idea of like CDs or Napster culture, or like the idea that you couldn't have everything that you want at your fingertips.
Yes, right. It was right. Physical media was still the dominant way that we experienced things, and you still went to the video store. So maybe there is a lot to be nostalgic for, and I can see that. I mean, it's interesting. There's definitely a lot, or not a lot, but a few songs that explicitly reference that time period. Troye Sivan and Charlie XCX had a song called 1999 that came out a few years ago.
Oh, right.
An artist named Anne Marie had a song called 2002 that also came out a few years ago. So I do think like Gen Z artists pine for that moment. And perhaps it is because compared to the contemporary landscape, it does seem sort of bucolic or something.
Right. And what's that cover of Blue that's on Top 40 radio right now? Like, I feel
that's,
like that.
David Guetta, I believe.
Is that David Guetta? Is he the one who does that? I was just thinking like that some of these covers are also from younger people who are like, I want to recover that musical feeling.
Yeah.
And put it into a contemporary feeling. And I think that there is actually a hunger for an acoustic style almost.
Mm-hmm.
That is somewhat 90s too. And you see this, I've seen this on TikTok with younger people, and women in particular, talking about like discovering that Lilith Fair exists. Did you know there was a festival in the late 90s, right? Like, and all of these artists toured, like, and there's part of me that's like, oh my God, I'm so old. Like, how do they not know about Lilith Fair? But then there's part of me too that thinks, what a joy to discover that this existed. I
agree, because I don't think there has been a lot of space for those kind of artists, for Sarah McLachlan or an Alanis Morissette. I don't think she was part of Lilith Fair, but if it's okay, I'll group her in there.
We can loosely group her there.
Those artists were critically and commercially successful, but for a long time, first of all, that acoustic sound that you were referring to, and that sort of more in your face, political, empowered, vulnerable kind of lyrical message didn't have a space on the Billboard Hot 100. I do sense that might be changing with artists like
Billie Eilish,
exactly. Olivia Rodrigo.
Olivia Rodrigo, to me, like, I love her new album so much. It makes me feel like listening to Fiona Apple for the first time or something, right? Because it's musically complex and emotionally complex, and there's such a strong sense of authorship running through it.
Yes, that's kind of an exciting development to me, and does augur something hopeful for the future in terms of the culture having space for those voices. But I guess to return to Chris's initial question, I'm as we talk about it more, I am feeling more impressed by the power of nostalgia and realizing that it doesn't have to be accurate. That is nostalgia is exactly the sort of glossing over fine detail to just selectively remember the things that you want to. And again, probably the things that specifically stand out in contrast to this modern moment. So those kind of artists, those kind of sounds, those kind of dance oriented grooves that maybe aren't as common today feel very like a form of escapism, I think.
Yeah. I think too of how a lot of people approximately our age was very into like 60s culture in the 90s,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I can just imagine our parents being like, you think that it was like all Woodstock and like Summer of Love. And my
Totally,
mom's
yeah.
like, what it actually was my brother and my dad fighting about the war constantly at the dinner table, right? Like,
Yeah.
like that's their, I
Yeah.
mean, that was in time of incredible unrest that I think like is rivaled by our current moment. But that's not when I was a teen, what I was trying to like evoke or what I was feeling when I listened to like, I don't know, Joan Baez.
Right. And also, I don't feel very qualified to say this, but I am vaguely aware that there's also a 2000s fashion renaissance happening
There
right
is.
now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Again, I don't feel confident telling the audience exactly what that consists of, but
I can talk to you about it. I mean, it's basically everything that we wore in high school. And
Yeah.
this is for women and for men to some extent, but I think it's more vivid for women because women's fashion is just more like, I don't know, visible, demonstrative,
Right,
whatever.
right, yeah.
All of those things are back. And that's down to like the fabric of the t-shirt, right? It's like velvet t-shirts
Yeah.
to the cut of pants, right? And the type of boots, all of those things. And I think that what's difficult for people who are older to understand is like part of our reaction to those clothes is so incredibly invested in like how we felt at that age.
Right.
Right. So like when I think of being a junior in high school and wearing these clothes that I see all over,
Yeah.
whether it's in Urban Outfitters or like just like on kids that I see, it doesn't make me feel like, wow, what a time of possibility, 1998. Right? Like it makes me feel like I felt bad about my body. I didn't know who liked me. I wish I could get asked to prom. Like all of these like incredibly, banal and essential ways of feeling when you're that age. And so I think it's hard to disarticulate those emotions from that music.
Yeah.
In good
Yeah,
ways and
I
bad
think
ways,
that-
right? So
yeah.
when I hear Tupac, like when I hear All Eyes on Me, I'm like, I loved the feeling that I had when I was listening to Tupac riding in the car, right?
Yeah.
Not saying the swears because like that was back when I didn't say swears. Like I would just pause and not say the swears.
Totally. Yeah.
But then there's some music that makes me feel like this is when no one would ask you to dance at like
Yeah,
the
totally.
dance after the football game or whatever.
Yeah. Songs you'd rather forget. I definitely have a few of those as well. Yeah.
What's a song you'd rather forget?
I maybe like Cotton Eye Joe comes to mind. that is a song that I just remembered dreading coming on and
And everyone
having
do
to
like fake like
having to do a
hoedown dance.
A horrible approximation of a line dance with a bunch of 10-year-olds. It was yeah.
One of mine used to be, for complicated reasons, Return of the Mac. But since listening to
Fascinating.
60 songs that explain the 90s, the episode from that podcast on that song, I have an incredible appreciation for the song. Like,
Oh, I love that.
sort of like Kiss from a Rose, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I think it got so overplayed in the 90s that I was like, I don't need to hear this
Right.
Seal song again. But now that I understand musically everything that's going on with it, it makes me appreciate it so much more from a distance.
So are you telling me I have to go listen to Cotton Eye Joe until I
That's actually a bad song.
until I understand its hidden wonders?
I don't think there's any recuperation of
Okay.
of Cotton Eye Joe.
I'm grateful.
So our last theory is the same theory, but a little bit different. And I think we're going to have to put ourselves in a slightly different headspace here. So this comes from Michaela, and it's coming from the Gen Z perspective.
I associate early 2000s music with the drive to elementary school and with middle school dances. Do you think it's becoming popular again because of Gen Z nostalgia as we come into adulthood?
So this is not us, right? Like we are in late adulthood or mid adulthood, not late, mid adulthood. This is like we have to put ourselves back at like age 29. What did we like to listen to then? Like, did we have that feeling of nostalgia for the music that defined our teens and our tweens, that sort of thing?
So this is something that I think would probably be, more anecdotal, but I can relate to this. I can't speak for Michaela, but I feel like a certain level of nostalgia for my own past was accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. And during that period, I sort of retreated a little bit from the modern world, I guess, and went into places of like maximum comfort, which involved going and getting out my CD collection, I had like 2 giant booklets of double-sided plastic CD cases.
I can feel it in my hand right now. It's so heavy.
It's so heavy, yeah. And going through and going, I remember this album that I got, and going into my car, because that's the only CD player I have at this point, and putting it in and listening to it. And that was true of other media too. I was like rewatching shows like Seinfeld and The Office and things that I didn't want to watch anything new. I just wanted to watch the things that I was already familiar with. So I think it's a natural reaction to want to recapture that feeling of lost childhood. And additionally, there's even a neurological explanation. There's a fusing that happens when your brain is developing and you're listening to music. Those songs become really locked into your synaptic pathways in this way that lasts a long time. Yeah.
That's not just like a story I tell myself about like why I listen to Sarah McLachlan's Fumbling Towards Ecstasy all the time still.
That's a very, you can blame that on neuroscience. That song is in your neurotransmitters, and perhaps at someday when you're 112, you'll still be able to recall, every lyric of that song.
Yeah.
So because of this neurological connection, and perhaps for other people as well, this desire for like things that are familiar and comforting, I do see more and more reaching back into your personal musical past to recreate some of those feelings of joy and familiarity.
I think that sometimes this is something that makes people feel bad because they're not seeking out the new. But I also, as someone who has, so this past year I saw Natalie Merchant, and it was like life-changing. Like, it was amazing.
Really? Wow. I love that.
So good. My best friend and I were front row, and everyone else was 10 years older than us, because it's like all of these fans who were really 10,000 Maniacs fans.
Gotcha.
But she and I, we played all of like Natalie Merchant's Ophelia, Motherland, these kind of mid-career albums of hers all the time in college. We were roommates, and we had like, a 50 disc changer, which a lot of people had as like graduation gifts, in high school. That was like a classic graduation gift, was the ridiculously numbered CD player. And you'd be like, okay, put this on, like, this is the next one, right? And so those were like woven into our subconscious. And, I still listen to new music, but then there's something incredibly powerful about experiencing it in concert, or just like giving yourself space to listen to it again. I think the other thing, and this maybe is true for Gen Z, but I think it's particularly true for people around our age, is that listening to an entire album can take you back to that time when like you put on music and you stared at the ceiling, right?
Yeah.
So like a different experience of music than how we often experience music now. And maybe that's where the nostalgia is from too.
Interesting. Where music now is often happening in the background of some other activity.
Yeah.
It's being played on a crappy iPhone speaker, or like out of a pair of AirPods that you can hear someone sitting next to you on the subway. That's interesting. It makes me think of my wife Whitney always talks. She doesn't know the names of songs. She's like, "Oh yeah, that's track 5."
100%.
So that gets back to some of the technological shifts that we've been discussing and how they have changed our relationship with music. And music has become less tactile and possessing less aura, maybe, as Walter Benjamin would say.
Wow, even did the Benjamin, didn't pronounce the J, wow.
I am an academic, so I had to drop him in there.
I think that where we're arriving is this interesting, complex, not we don't have no forceful argument here. This is a top-down thing, as in millennials are playing this music and it's somehow filtering down. But then it's also, I think, arriving somewhat organically from younger kids who are discovering this music. And as someone said to me, talking about how Hey Ya is all over the place again, they said a bop is a bop. Right? That song is back because that song is good.
Yes, a bop is a bop. I think that was Stravinsky who first said that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other overarching thoughts about this?
No, I mean, I do. I hope no one listening is disappointed that we haven't arrived at a
grand theory.
Yes, but I think that speaks to the fascinating and unruly ways that music and other media and popular culture move through society. That you can't really predict where a song will start and where it will end up. And hopefully there's some matrix of all these explanations that we've come up with that will be satisfying. But I find your the bop is a bop theory to be particularly strong, and that's why I would be interested whenever you have a question about something larger happening, go to a single song and trace it. Songs are like whole universes, and they're like portals into different times and places, and the way a song can be created and in its creation reference the past. I mean, let's talk about Hey Ya for a second. If that, I feel like that could be a great way to conclude this. Hey Ya, written by Andre Benjamin, not Benjamin, was a deliberate tribute to Aretha Franklin's Say a Little Prayer. It uses the same metric structure, the same rhythmic structure as that song. So that song is reaching back into the past, but then it's also looking forward to the future. It's a rapper singing, and that idea would change the face of music as we know it. And every Drake and every other singing rapper has Andre 3000 to thank for that.
Yep.
And then what happens to the song after that? It's covered. It has a Obadiah Parker acoustic cover in the 2000s, which transforms it into this sort of plaintive folk song. Today, it's, according to Spotify, it's one of the top 10 wedding songs for people, which again is kind of hilarious because it's a song about how no relationship is built to last. And if you think it is, you're deluding yourself. And I imagine this song will continue to be sampled and reinterpreted over time, and some core part of its meaning will stay the same, but it'll also change to adapt and reflect the tastes of the people who gravitate towards that song in that moment. So songs are entire worlds, and when you start to listen and study a song and hear all of its sort of manifold meanings, it can take you to so many different places and connect. Even the silliest song, even Cotton Eye Joe probably could connect to some powerful common core of humanity. So that feels like maybe hopefully a satisfying ending.
That's a future episode of Switched on Pop, is you recuperating Cotton Eye Joe.
Noted.
But
I'm remembering we did do something about it many, many years ago. So maybe it's time to revisit that.
So our last question is for our advice time segment. And normally this bonus content is only for paid subscribers, but we loved this conversation so much that we wanted all of you to benefit from it. This question is nostalgia adjacent, and it comes from Natalie. And I think it's absolutely in line with everything we've been talking about.
How do I get out of a pop culture rut? I often find myself rewatching the same shows and movies, listening to the same songs on repeat. I'll even listen to the same podcast episodes multiple times. On one hand, the repetition is comforting, and I already know that I like that thing, so why not listen to it again? But on the other hand, there's so much out there that I want to have experienced, but sometimes it feels like a chore to start something new. What's the deal with that?
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say, Natalie, is I think you're burned out. I think that this is a symptom of like having no energy to grapple with new things, and like you by seeking out these things that are comforting, like you are performing a kindness to yourself. She is being kind to her brain by finding these things that like just feel like home. They feel comfy. And I don't think that there's anything wrong or shameful about that. The same way that you were discussing like the things that you went to in the pandemic, right? Like that's just a way that we cope with the world around us. So yeah, I don't think that that's anything to be shamed about, but I think that like trying to think about the fact that like maybe this has to do with other things in my life and not necessarily like me having no taste or anything like that. What do you hear when you hear this?
I definitely relate to this. As I was saying earlier, this is something I felt especially acutely during the pandemic, and I'll give like 3 pieces of advice or answers for Natalie, and the first, I guess, is you can start to branch out from the things you love by actually going deeper into them. And you mentioned earlier a podcast called 60 Songs That Explain the 90s by, I think, Rob Harvilla is the host of that. And you could listen to, forgive me, our own podcast, Switched on Pop, and find episodes about songs you love. I think what's really cool is to take something that you love and understand it even deeper. Yeah. And you can do that by reading about it, by listening to it. And there's like, what I love about this moment is there's like more resources than ever. Like I was, speaking of nostalgia, I was rediscovering one of my favorite songs from the late 2000s, combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell by Das Racist. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. And I'm at the Pizza Hut, I'm at the Taco Bell, I'm at the combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. I mean, it's a classic. So good. And I was like, what is this? What is this song? And I went online and I was like, I don't know what I Googled. How did combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell get made? And there's a whole article on Slate that's an oral history of the song, and they interview the members of the band, and they talk all about it, and they talk to the people who listen to it. And I'm like, what a moment we live in, where I can literally just go online and find this deep dive into a novelty song that you thought no one had ever thought of. And so that's not getting you out of that rut necessarily, I guess, but it is like allowing you to understand and appreciate these things as not just something you love for no reason. Like these are artistic objects, and they have their own histories and stories, and it's fun to unpack those with other people who love them.
I will say that the way I got into Switched on Pop was during the pandemic and the series on Britney Spears. It's like a 5-part series, right? It's
a 4-part series. Yeah.
And I had seen it somewhere in a culture study thread about podcasts and recommendations for podcasts. And it just it absolutely beguiled me because like a lot of people was reappreciating Britney Spears at that time. But yeah, I think that that's such a great idea. It's not getting out of the rut, but it's expanding the rut, right? Yes. It's like making it more roomy. Like there's more room to figure out like your place in it. The other thing I would do is like, I don't know, it seems cheesy, but we used to do this all the time. Like ask your friends what they're listening to. Mm-hmm.
That is probably the most tried and true method of music and other media discovery. Yeah. And I will do exactly this. I'll just text a few trusted confidants and be like, what's your favorite record right now? And invariably that whatever answer they give becomes the thing that I become obsessed with for the next series of months. I love that you said that, Anne, and if I might be so emboldened, I could give some of the things that I'm listening to right now,
please,
because there's something extraordinary about this moment where there is so much to listen to. It can be overwhelming, but you can also find things that connect with the past in incredible ways. There's an artist right now named Leve. It's spelled Laufey. She's a 24-year-old Icelandic Chinese jazz-inspired singer-songwriter. And you listen to her and you hear, it sounds like it's something like a lost recording from 1952 that was just rediscovered with these lush orchestral strings and jazz harmonies. And she's got this voice that feels very sort of old and weathered for her age. This is an artist that you listen to and you're like, oh, the future of music is great. You know, we're in good hands.
Yeah.
It's not all doom and gloom and sped up hyper pop and digital distortion. It's like there's the youths are also into the same classic music that we were into growing up. And an artist like Leve is a great example of that. There's also a band I'm really liking right now called the Lemon Twigs, a set of brothers who reference classic 70s and 60s vocal pop and rock with really intricate double harmonies and 12-string Rickenbacker guitars. Feels like the Byrds and the Beatles if they were resurrected for a 21st century audience. They're a lot of fun. And I'll just give one more artist I really love right now, Anderson .Paak, a drummer and vocalist who's collaborated with Bruno Mars in Silk Sonic. And I love him because he has so much veneration for music history. On his last album, he did a collaboration with Smokey Robinson, which was one of my favorite tracks of recent years. So if you feel, I guess all to say, if you feel like, oh, there's nothing for me out there, I do think there is. It's just a matter of finding it.
Yeah. And being like unembarrassed about asking for recs, you know, not just texting, but you could put it on Instagram. You could be like, what are you listening to? Right. Yeah. Like, why do we have social media if we can't use it in these ways?
That's right.
Or like, I like these three bands. What else would I like? My two recs, which are not nearly as cool as yours, are like, if you are someone, because I know that there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast who, like me, were like very into Lilith Fair. Like, if you have not discovered Boy Genius yet, like they will soothe all that ails you. And then the other, like, I got really into kind of, I don't like the designation alt country, like, but that style during the pandemic. And one of the artists that has really stuck with me and that I think like feels like you were saying, like, it feels very old, feels very timeless, but also feels very now, is Coulter Wall, who sounds like he was born in 1920. Like, I don't really understand. And he's actually like a cattle rancher in Alberta, who's in his 20s, but looks like he was born in 1920, and he sounds like it. But those are two of my get out of your rut recs.
I love that. I heartily co-sign both of those. Those are great picks.
And also just revisiting SKIBIDI Toilet, like that.
SKIBIDI Toilet. Wow, way to bring it back to where it all began, man. I'd almost successfully banished that from my
No, you gotta watch it now.
And now it's right back in there and will be haunting me for weeks to come, I think.
Nate, thank you so much for joining me. Can you remind all of our listeners where they can find you if they want to hear more from you?
Absolutely. You can listen to the podcast that I host with songwriter Charlie Harding, Switched on Pop, anywhere you get podcasts, or on our website, switchedonpop.com. And if you're living in the LA area and interested in going back to school, you can enroll at the University of Southern California Thornton School of Music and take some of my music history classes there.
Oh my gosh. Everyone, do it. Audit the class. It's great. Continuing education, lifelong learners. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because we have so many great episodes in the works, like so many. And I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Substack. The full version of today's episode is free for everyone. So if you like what you've heard and you want to support the show, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year. And you can also get a really good deal if you're already a subscriber to the newsletter. And you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive Ask Anne Anything segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. It's like Disney Fast Pass, but for your weird questions about culture. And if you're already a paid subscriber, thank you so much. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.